Welcome to meeting number 2 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Pursuant to Standing Order 106.4, the committee is meeting at the request of 4 members of the committee to discuss recent COVID-19 development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Order November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation, in light of the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as a directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not attend the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2-meter physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, including when seated. Everyone must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean surfaces such as the desk, chair, and microphone with the provided disinfected wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. As regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking from members, whether they are participating virtually or in person.
Just to give a small reminder to everyone to try to connect a little in advance of meetings going forward, just in case we have IT issues like we're having right now. That gives us time to solve them before the committee starts, and that's mindful of everybody's time. So the meeting is open, and I open the floor, given that we've received this 106.4 for the committee to meet. And I see and I recognize Mr. Ed Fast. And Mr. Fast, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. After 2 years, we should know that, shouldn't we? But Mr. Chair, thank you for accommodating our request for this meeting. My Conservative colleagues and I are strong believers in freer and fairer trade. And that includes the flow of investment into and out of Canada. And I suspect we wouldn't have any disagreement on that here at committee. And by the way, Chair, do we need to read the motion into the record, or is it taken that it's already been done so?
I'm just a moment. I just want to verify you understand. And as I told you last committee, this is my first time chairing, so I might be relying on the chair more than I want to at the end. But I'm hearing that it's fine. It doesn't need to be read into the record, Mr. Fast.
Glad to hear that. As you know, Canada is a significant beneficiary of investment and generally welcomes inbound investment from elsewhere around the world. But from time to time, proposed investments, foreign investments, may not represent a net benefit to Canada. And that's why the Investment Canada Act provides for certain foreign investments to be reviewed to determine whether they are of a net benefit to Canada and whether or not they represent a national security risk to our country. It goes without saying that acquisitions by hostile foreign regimes and those countries that don't follow international trade and investment rules should be subject to careful scrutiny before being approved by our government. Under the former Harper government, some of you will recollect that we implemented a set of criteria that would be applied to investments from foreign state-owned enterprises. That was the case following CNOOC's purchase of an interest in the oil sands back in, I believe it was around 2011, 2012. Sadly, more recently, our current government failed to undertake a national security of neolithium to Chinese state-owned company Zijin Mining Group. And that's why I've tabled this motion that is before you today. And it goes without saying, but bears restating that critical minerals such as lithium are a strategic asset, not only for Canada, but for the world. and will play a critical role in driving our future prosperity and in meeting our environmental objectives. These minerals are used in production of things like semiconductors, electric vehicles and batteries, and many other industrial and health-related products. And they play an important role in helping us meet our climate change objectives. Although we have yet to tap Canada's potential in terms of these minerals, we know that a number of regions of Canada, including parts of Ontario and Quebec, have significant deposits of these minerals. The reason I know that is I've chatted with the Mining Association of Canada, and I encourage all of you to do so, and the potential those critical minerals represent for our economy and for the global economy. Now, recently we've seen what shortages of these minerals can do to supply chains. Shortages of semiconductors have had a negative impact on Canada's manufacturing sector and on the Canadian and global economy as a whole. So it's imperative that Canada take the issue of critical minerals and the domestic and global supply chain of these minerals seriously. Canada risks falling behind in developing and protecting its own leaders in this industry and allowing the foreign takeover of companies like Neolithium without due diligence or proper scrutiny will further weaken our strategic interest in ensuring an adequate global supply of lithium and other critical minerals. So, Mr. Chair, we are seeking clarification on why this Neolithium transaction has not been the subject of a national security review. I know that there are some that say there's nothing to see here. Neolithium's ore body and mining operations are in Argentina, not in Canada. So what's the big deal? What they forget is that critical minerals are a strategic global asset, global, I emphasize, and that it doesn't matter where the mines are located. What matters is who controls the asset. It is incumbent upon free trading, rule-following countries and allies to ensure that the critical minerals industry isn't monopolized by any one country, especially if those interests are sometimes hostile towards ours. Just a couple of minutes, Mr. Chair, and I'll be finished.
Just, Mr. Fast, before you continue, can you raise your mic a little bit? I have a report from translation that it's creating a popping sound. Thank you.
Check, check, check. How does that work?
A little higher?
A little higher. All right. Check, check, check. 1, 2, 3.
That's
does that work? All right. I also wanted to note that when a Canadian company, Canadian mining company is sold to a foreign entity, it is not only its mining assets that are sold, it's also Canadian mining technology, Canadian intellectual property, and Canadian mining expertise that we lose in those transactions. So, Mr. Chair, as former trade minister, I remember well in 2011, 2012, somewhere in that time span, China began hoarding rare earth and shook up significant elements of the global economy in the process. The global community had to finally take China to the World Trade Organization to enforce China's obligation to follow the rules of free trade and allow these vital assets to be released to the rest of the world. Now, what has changed today is that in recent years, the World Trade Organization's ability to enforce its rules has diminished significantly. And it is questionable whether the organization is even capable of preventing the hoarding and manipulation of critical minerals and rare earths anymore. And that's why it's critical that like-minded nations, like Canada, like the US, like Australia, pay careful attention to who is positioning themselves to monopolize these assets to the detriment of the larger global economy. A national security review should be standard practice whenever a Canadian miner like Neolithium is sold to a foreign entity. Our credibility with our most trusted allies is at stake. Our reputation as the world's leading mining nation is at stake, and our future prosperity is at stake. So what happened, Mr. Chair? What happened here? Why wasn't a national security review undertaken by our Liberal government? I want to know, we conservatives want to know, and Canadians want to know. So let's get to the bottom of this. In the process, I expect we'll discover existing weaknesses in Canada's foreign investment review process that should be addressed by the government. So colleagues, I urge all of you to support this motion and to direct our committee clerk to schedule meetings and begin to reach out to potential witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak to this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Fast. And I see Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fast, for your thoughtful and really well considered position on this. I'm just ruffling papers to find where I wrote my notes on these many papers here. Like you, I think everyone on the committee shares the interest in Canada's participation in the transition to battery technology and all that means. In fact, Monsieur Lemire has some mines in his riding that will become very important in this transition. In my own riding, there is a significant battery research operation led by Dr. Jeff Don, who has been awarded a Governor General Award for his work on batteries. I think we all share this desire that we participate in this transition. After I've come to learn a little bit more about lithium, it's my position and feeling that the position taken by the Conservative government, while well-intentioned to protect Canada's interest, was a little hasty. As we know now, some of the details about the mine itself, for example, it's a mine of lithium carbonate, not lithium hydroxide. And what's the difference? We don't see the difference written in the media anywhere, but lithium hydroxide is what we use in batteries and what's relevant to semiconductors and the automobile industry and so forth. But this mine that is in question is actually lithium carbonate, which is irrelevant to that kind of manufacturing, to batteries, to autos, and to semiconductors. Combined with the fact that this really is not a Canadian company, it's an Argentinian company. It's got its directors in UK. It had, I believe, it might have been 3 Canadian employees on paper, but really, it's the only intention, the only reason it had any Canadian toehold whatsoever was to have a presence on the TSX in hopes of raising money. So I think. Far from there not having been a review, as has been reported, the department actually did do a review, and these are the things they found, right? That in fact it's not a relevant lithium to Canada's national security interests, and it's not really a Canadian company. So my thinking here then is. Wouldn't it be a much better use of this good intention that we all share, including Mr. Fast, you with your motion, a much better use of our committee's time and our good intentions to instead focus on the critical mineral study that I tabled the notice of motion for back in December. I don't mention it was me because I don't want any credit for it, but it's already tabled is my point. And the committee showed great support for that, and I think the subcommittee was just waiting to schedule it. So my invitation to my colleagues of all parties on the committee is that we, now that we know that this particular transaction is irrelevant to national security interests and in fact to Canada's battery future in any way, and that it's not really a Canadian company, why don't we focus on doing the right thing for the mines and Monsieur Lemire's riding, the right thing for the researchers in my riding, and the right thing for Canadians overall, and focus instead on the full study of critical minerals as has been tabled with the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Fillmore. Je vois Monsieur Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Mass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues gathered today. I supported this motion to come to committee for a number of different reasons. There's the issue in itself, which I'll speak to in a moment, but also too is the use of this committee time. As members of the committee know, a week ago, I actually tabled a motion for this committee to meet to have emergency meetings to examine hero pay and testimony in front of us with regards to grocery store workers. And one of the reasons I did so is because this has been an ongoing problem with Parliament since the last unnecessary election. Is committee business has been ground to a halt. We just came from a session of Parliament where we had ample time to reform committees and get to work during this time. We did not do any of that. In fact, there was delays and committees were not formed, and we still at this committee do not have an official business plan for the upcoming session. So the suggestion that we can't do work in between is erroneous and not representative of the history of this committee, which I have been on for 15 of my approximately 20 years in Parliament. We've often convened emergency meetings during non-parliamentary sitting days, whether it be for studying gas prices, the Nortel takeover, a series of different things with regards to telecommunications on a regular basis. This does not interfere with our upcoming agenda. The motion was put in a way that if it will have some type of residue in the upcoming Parliament, it will be minimal. The reason I wanted the pandemic pay for, or hero pay, whatever you may want it to say, was for testimony for the executives that actually came before our previous Parliament. Some members of this committee were here for that. We could have met about that, and we've chosen not to. So when this initiative came forward, I support that because next week we do have time available for us. There are not many other committees working. Some are, and they're showing initiatives on their own as well. We have set up Parliament to be very proactive through virtual meetings to be able to do so. So I believe that there may be some interesting points with regards to combining this with the larger study. The issue is very pertinent not only to the country, but also for the world with regards to lithium batteries. Coming from the auto sector myself, where I've long pushed for a national auto strategy, includes having more than just rip and ship philosophy with regards to our national resources. We've been outmaneuvered quite successfully by Mexico, the United States, China, and others with regards to EV technology, battery development, and as well as a modern national auto strategy. Despite the fact that we have signed on with the United States for emissions with regards to the vehicles, we have not actually produced the battery plants, the sustainable jobs, and also the revolutionary necessary technology that equates to value-added jobs in our country. So I'm interested in pursuing this for the next week and to produce a report or a study, as opposed to going into circles or not meeting for another week and a half. Again, the election was months and months and months ago. And prior to that, the committee did not meet as much leading up into the election. So what have we done during the pandemic? And what have we done to actually look at the time that we have available for us? Again, we went through an unnecessary election that resulted in a similar Parliament that has stalled the work of this committee and the success for Canadians to compete and to get things done. What's being proposed is a defined study of 6 meetings that will at least provide a glimmer or at least a little bit of a shed of light about the issue in general. If this committee wishes to roll that into further study, I am cooperative, and so is the NDP to do that. But in the meantime, since I couldn't get my emergency meeting passed with regards to having the executives come back here for the grocery store and the hero pay or whatever you may want to call it, then I'm willing to meet next week because I still think it's better than not meeting, especially given the agenda we have and the issues facing Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Mr. Ursensmith.
Thanks, Joel. So just to Brian's point, I would have liked, to hit the ground running in December, and I share that frustration to some extent. But in terms of this motion before us, I think this motion is a waste of our time if we're spending 6 meetings looking at neolithium. And so just to share the view that I want to make sure this is a productive committee and I want to get the work done, if we could, just so I'm clear to what Brian's saying, is the idea we meet next week, but in relation to, and we'll look at amending this motion in relation to a broader study around critical minerals. I'm certainly open to that idea, but if it's a matter of let's just get to work, so we might as well study this, I pause because I don't think actually that's a productive use of our time. So and by the way, people can ask about neolithium to the minister when he attends, because I think we should have the minister in to talk about his mandate letter and more, and people can ask about neolithium in the course of a critical mineral study that is broader. But I think that to me would be a way that we could lean in and make a difference as a committee on the subject of critical minerals, if that's where we want to go. Brian, I had not seen your I'm not sure, it wasn't a 1064, so I hadn't seen it come around, I guess, in quite the same way. But if there's an opportunity to revisit that important issue around wage fixing, I would certainly welcome the opportunity. But on the just so I'm clear, Brian, on the particulars of this motion, is the idea we just get to work next week? That's your goal, but you're comfortable with the idea being it be a broader look at critical minerals, and we don't have to spin our wheels around this one particular company.
Mr. Chair, can I answer? I just don't want to presume.
Yes, Mr. Massey, I'll just leave it up to you to answer and then go to Madam Gray.
Thank you, and I appreciate your previous work on both of those issues with regards to new technology and also the grocery store stuff. So I submitted it before, and yeah, I don't know if all members saw it. It doesn't, it was well put across, and it was also out in the media. But at any rate, I'm open to making this a constructive process forward, and I don't like the fact that we have this time available for us, and we have a week in between, and I'd like to do something with it. So this is what was presented as another alternative in front of me. The committee didn't take up mine, which is fine. That's okay. There's lots of things happening. I understand it wasn't seen as a priority. This initiative was presented in front of me. I'd rather meet next week, and if it means like 6 meetings, then time we actually have another planning meeting or we organize other studies, then we get witnesses, we have some blank space. I know that you've mentioned before about having Mr. Scott here at this committee and others and I think those are correct, but we're not there where we have that plan yet. So I think that if we did something, even if we followed through with this, it could be something value added to Mr. Fillmore's suggestion later on, that we won't have wasted time, energy, or some of the witnesses could cross over. I just see it as better than the not meeting in many respects. I think it's worthy on its own to take a look at, and to conclude, it's a better position for this committee and for work that might actually extend into something later on that I'm open to. I'm not closing doors to any of that, but I'd certainly like to get going. This is an issue that's taken flight, not only just in Canada, but the United States and across the world with regards to the use of lithium and resources around it. And then on top of that, the auto sector where I come from. But again, lastly, at least we will get some good testimony. We will hear some discussion points that might be interesting to the public and might open up some more conversations. The issue could actually unravel some other things that are necessary. So I see that as much more valuable than just waiting around for another week for Parliament to open up and trying to figure out our business at that time. We got an idea, we got a plan in front of us. To me, I'll support that.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. I see Madam Gray.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is an important study and one that should be a priority for this committee. And I'll start off by saying there was a previous member that had made the comment regarding lithium carbonate. And it should be noted that this can also be chemically converted to lithium hydroxide. And there's high demand for this. There are articles online that you can see where it states that the demand is increasing due to its use in batteries. So that comment wasn't relevant to this conversation. When I was last on this committee, one of the final studies that we completed was on the Investment Canada Act. And this recent purchase of neolithium from a foreign state-owned enterprise and the federal government failing to do a security review should prompt a study. We need to hear from the ministers responsible as well as CSIS and department officials. I recall that we had at that time Tim Hallwig from CSIS during the Investment Canada Act study, and I had questioned him regarding what risks could arise of Canadian data going to a foreign state-owned enterprise. He also touched on what he called, quote, potential risks to control of strategic sectors. I think we can all agree that Canada's mining sector and procurement of lithium with the increased production of green technology is a strategic sector. A national security review would have looked at various considerations around this, including how this would affect Canadian intellectual property, and the government failed to conduct this review. If we also consider principles of reciprocity, which were brought up by Professor Charles Burton in this study, the question needs to be raised. So why is the Liberal government allowing foreign state-owned enterprises to purchase a Canadian natural resource company without a diligent review? During the previous study, it became very evident that the thresholds presently in the Investment Canada Act were not adequate. This also flows into the recommendations made by the committee to the government early in 2021, which called on the government to have automatic reviews of all purchases of Canadian companies by state-owned enterprises, to protect strategic sectors such as natural resources, and to block any transaction that would undermine our national security by transferring sensitive assets. Despite these recommendations being made to the government nearly a year ago, the sale of Neo-Lithium appears to show the government ignored all of these recommendations, which this same committee agreed on. The intellectual property concern has been reiterated recently in this specific case from experts like Wesley Wark of the Center for International Governance Innovation, and to frame this in the context of our North American supply chain. Jeff Kerchatsky, an energy policy professor at Royal Roads University and fellow at Macdonald-Laurier Institute, wrote in the Toronto Star recently, calling the government's lack of national security review, quote, bizarre, with it undermining the ability to strengthen Canadian supply chains for critical minerals. There are many other examples we heard in the last study, and I believe based on those concerns then and the concerns that we're hearing now, this should be studied promptly, and I hope that all members of the committee will support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Gray. I see Michael Cram.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to be able to speak in favor of the motion to carry out this very important study. Lithium is a key input to the manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles, and global demand for lithium and batteries is expected to grow dramatically over the next couple of decades. Therefore, Canada needs a reliable supply of lithium so our manufacturers can produce the large capacity batteries needed for electric vehicles built here in Canada. In the not too distant future, Canadian auto workers working on the assembly line will require a steady supply of large capacity batteries in the same way that they require a steady supply of bucket seats, transmissions, tires, and all the other parts that make up a car. It should be apparent that large-scale lithium-ion battery factories will not be built in Canada without lithium. Officials from the Liberal government, including the industry minister, need to appear before this committee. They need to explain why the Chinese government, which already controls a quarter of the global supply of lithium batteries, was allowed to buy a Canadian lithium producer through one of its state-owned enterprises without a national security review. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I encourage all members of the committee to vote in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Cram. Monsieur Erskine-Smith.
Thanks, Joel. So a few different things, I suppose. So, Brian, so I understand the goal here, because I understood we were going to have a subcommittee meeting on Tuesday of next week, and then we were going to hit the ground running the following week. So if it's a matter of seizing an additional week and a half or so, I'm okay with that. But I just, if we look at this study in particular, what I would look to get out of this, we'd have the minister and or his officials attend before us, and I would put one question to them, which is, what was the advice of the preliminary analysis of the department? And if the preliminary analysis was, don't do a full review and here's why, then I'm not that interested in spending 6 meetings looking into it. Now, if the preliminary analysis was do a full review and the government did not decline to do that full review, then I think it's worth inquiring. But I'm a little bit worried that we're skewing our entire agenda here without knowing that the answer to that preliminary question, and we're allocating 6 meetings when I would like the minister in to talk about his mandate letter, not only critical minerals, but to discuss the Net Zero Accelerator, to discuss the digital privacy legislation that is likely to come to us this spring if we can retable it from the last session. So there are a number of things I would like to ask the minister, and I would encourage colleagues who are interested specifically in Neo-Lithium to put the questions to the minister. But I think we should have him before us sooner than later. I think we should have Ian Scott for a meeting, and we could, my idea was to have the minister and Ian Scott in for preliminary meetings to hold time as we invite other witnesses for a longer term study. And so that was kind of my hope. Now, if we want to get into how we can use this committee most effectively and do some work next week, I'm open to that idea. I don't see a 6-meeting study for neolithium specifically, when the likely answer back from officials is our recommendation was not to do a full review based on the facts as we know them. I just can't imagine that we're establishing a schedule of 6 meetings today, right now, over what we know. So I mean, I would just encourage us to be a little bit more strategic about, yes, let's use your time. And if we want to get going next week, let's do it. But let's get going in a little bit more of a thoughtful way, I think would be the approach I'd suggest.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. And just as a point of information, I have asked the clerk to reserve next Tuesday during our usual meeting spots so that we could have a subcommittee meeting to plan the agenda as we resume Parliament. I wanted to see what the consensus was and how the debate evolved today first. So, but that has been reserved if the subcommittee wants to meet. So just as a point of information, I have Mr. Fillmore.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the comments that all members are bringing forward. Just on the point of was this transaction reviewed, was it not reviewed? I just want to share with the committee the sort of baseline information that a spokesperson with the Federal Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development wrote, and this actually was published in the Globe, so it's public knowledge, that investments in critical minerals are systematically and thoroughly scrutinized by the Investment Review Division of the department in concert with the responsible government departments and Canada's security and intelligence community, and through consultations with foreign allies wherever appropriate. And she added that every foreign takeover of a Canadian firm is reviewed on its merits. She said considerations can include such factors as the nature of the mineral deposits involved, since some forms of critical minerals are of greater or lesser strategic value to Canada, the ability of Canadian supply chains to exploit the asset, and the nature of the Canadian business and whether it has operations in Canada, or for example, is principally domiciled here for regulatory or other reasons with few, if any, local staff or assets. So as I mentioned before, and as has now become common knowledge about neolithium, they only had this very tenuous toehold in Canada to participate in the TSX in hopes of raising funding for their sort of increasingly dubious appearing operation in Argentina. So I just want to reveal the fact that this has been reviewed. We shouldn't repeat the mythology that no review was undertaken, because it was indeed reviewed. And then on the question that Ms. Gray raised regarding carbonate versus hydroxide, well, I mean, I could probably make a passable hat using my socks, but I'd much rather wear a hat. The process involved with, well, I'll just read. I'll read this. As it turns out, lithium hydroxide is better suited in the production of batteries when compared to its alternative, lithium carbonate. Although lithium carbonate can be converted into lithium hydroxide, it comes at additional cost and additional steps. And I understand additional significant environmental implications as well, which of course undermines the whole point of switching to batteries at all. So let's not shift course from the understanding that the minerals in this mine are not of strategic relevance to Canadian industry or security. I think that we can take that as truth for now. Now, I want to agree with my colleague, Mr. Erskine-Smith. I want to get back to work here. I want to get back to work quickly. We have a subcommittee meeting scheduled for next week that is going to help to organize our workflow. We have a number of motions already tabled that are important, relevant studies. I think that there's nobody on this committee that doesn't want to be productive, and we all want to support each other. And I must say, the tone of December was fabulous. It was collaborative and constructive. And I'm afraid what's happened now is that this sort of hasty position taken on neolithium that we have now given lie to is tending to mitigate the constructive tone of our committee. And I very much would love us all to get back to that and let the subcommittee do its work and get some studies in the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you very much. Just 3 quick points. First of all, to Mr. Fillmore's comments. This was not a hasty decision to review this decision by committee. You know, Parliament should have been sitting some time ago. We have another week coming up, which is empty of meetings for our committee. So it makes sense for us to do some useful work there. I would highlight again and restate, this is a Canadian mining company. The notion that this has a tenuous connection to Canada, somehow this is dubious, it's just false. And Mr. Fillmore, I want to assure you, we are fully committed to working collaboratively with the chair, with you and your colleagues all around the table. The fact that we brought forward this proposed study should not in any way be taken as somehow disrupting that collaboration and collegiality around the table. I think you would admit that. So I would direct your attention, members and colleagues, to the website itself. We're not experts in lithium. I doubt that the minister himself is an expert in lithium, although my Liberal friends are asserting that somehow this lithium, nothing to see here, has no impact at all on our battery and our EV ecosystem. Here's what the website actually says, the Neo Lithium website. I quote, "We are on the cusp of a global energy transformation on the back of the lithium-ion battery technology. In the near future, the lithium industry will face the challenge to increase production to meet the demand required for the electrification of transportation. Neo Lithium's 3Q project is the preeminent lithium brine asset in the world to meet this demand." End quote. So, folks, let's not be under the illusion that our Chinese friends are interested in this company because somehow they like lithium carbonate, and it's this product that has no significant role to play in the global economy. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just a final comment, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Our role as committee is not simply to hear the minister's explanation and then rubber stamp it. We as committee members have a role to play, and that is oversight, to scrutinize the decisions and the actions of government. And that's what we're doing with these proposed meetings. We want to scrutinize this decision because I believe it is a very important one. And the facts that we are now disputing here can easily be clarified if we hold a number of meetings to discuss this. It's a reasonable request from a reasonable opposition. So I would ask all of you to support us in moving ahead with this. Let's make the coming week productive.
Merci, Monsieur Fast. Donc j'avais.
Thank you, Mary Fest. Sebastian? So I think you've put your hand down, so Mr. Erskine.
Well, it's true. I'm not always reasonable, Ed. So I'm not. In fairness, but on this, I think my view would be, and I think we can use this time to do maybe the subcommittee work that would have taken place on Tuesday if we want to be a little faster with our schedule. But I wonder if we can find a compromise here. I personally think 6 meetings for a single company, I feel like I'm going to be wasting my time when we could ask questions of this company. We could ask questions about this company. We could bring the same officials you want to bring in, Ed, and we can bring the minister in and ask officials about this particular instance. But I don't know why we wouldn't cast it with a broader net to say, let's look at critical mineral sector more broadly. Let's look at the strategy. Let's look at the Investment Canada Act. Let's look at battery innovation and sustainable battery innovation. And let's look more broadly at how the government should be pursuing and proceeding on this issue. And so that would be what I would be more comfortable with. And you would attain what you want to attain, I think. But it would be in the context where we could present recommendations that would hopefully be impactful. There would still be the accountability function, don't get me wrong. But we would be looking at a much broader issue where I think we could play a role in assisting going forward. 6 meetings seems like too many meetings for such a narrow issue with respect to one particular company. So I don't know if you'd be open to an amendment that casts this more widely, and we look at the critical mineral sector more widely, including the Investment Canada Act. You'd still be able to ask the questions with the witnesses you like, but I think we'd be able to get more substantive work done.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. So I see Mr. Dong.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening carefully to my colleagues. This is relatively new to me, the emergency meeting motion. And I also learned from my colleague, NDP colleague, MP Massey, that he had intended to introduce a subject of study for emergency meeting, and that's news to me.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I don't. Sorry, Brian. I don't mean it in this disrespectful way.
Just a moment, Mr. Dong. There was a point of order, Mr. Massey.
Yeah, I just want to confirm with the clerk that my emergency motion was actually distributed last week. Just so Mr. Dong is clear, as I didn't propose to present something in the future. I actually did propose it, and it was distributed amongst all members. I just want to confirm that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that confirmation will be helpful too. I apologize if it was. I was notified and somehow I missed it. I do apologize for it. But in terms of the committee's schedule or calendar, I have not heard any official opposition from last meeting or between the last meeting and today. So I remember the game plan was that the subcommittee will decide or come back with a proposal on what the upcoming study schedule will be. And it's now we are here at the emergency meeting discussing the possibility of doing this emergency study. And I have to be honest, like between the two studies, the one from my NDP colleague and the one from the Conservative colleague, I think that the one that I'm more interested in the one that presented by the NDP colleague because it's quite relevant. And in terms of urgency, that could directly impacting Canadians and my constituents included, I think that study is way more relevant. So if we're going to have an emergency meeting next week to do an emergency study, my preference, of course, we have to go through the process of voting. My preference will be doing the one that impact my constituents more directly. So and I'm happy to have another meeting next week, to meet. But I just want to point out the fact that we did not oppose to. We agreed to a game plan in the last meeting to have the subcommittee look at the schedule. And my last point is I was hearing from a Conservative colleague, there was some assumption made, as if if the government somehow through our recommendation or study blocked the sale of this company or back then going back, if they blocked it, it would guarantee their product will be used in Canada, right? So I think that's a big assumption because at the end of the day, these products are mined from in another country by a decision made by executives that not Canadians necessary. So I think we've got to be very careful with drawing that assumption that just because we block the sales, that we can guarantee these products can be used in Canadian market. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, given what we've just heard, I'd like to move an amendment. I take it for granted that there has been a request for a meeting next Tuesday so that we can establish an agenda. So all members will be able to have a solid agenda, which perhaps was missing in our preparatory work up to date. Therefore, I would like to move that an amendment of the motion to the Conservative motion. So instead of having 6 meetings, let's have 2 meetings that will take place next week. So that would be 3 committee meetings if we include the organizing meeting. And this would perhaps be a decision made by the subcommittee. So 2 meetings on the Neolithium transaction. We'll hear from Minister Champagne, who may be accompanied by his officials, such as the deputy minister. But at the same time, I think the minister will be able to talk about accountability. And in the second meeting, which this might be interesting to have the Minister of Public Safety, and that's a question I put to the Conservatives. I haven't heard an explanation for this presence. I'd like to hear the why behind this. And there are people who have been able to testify, including the professor. So 2 meetings next week with respect to the Neolithium transaction. That's my proposal. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. So there's an amendment to the motion that's on the table. We could discuss this motion. So I see the mover of the motion, Mr. Fass. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Mr. Lemire for his willingness to study this. I think he understands the importance of making sure that Canada's critical assets are protected and used in a way that benefits Canadians. One of the things I would point out to Mr. Lemire, and I'm asking for his response, if we have the minister or ministers appear before us, they will also be bringing officials who will likely occupy at least 1 meeting. We know that they're likely simply going to say, hey, nothing to see here. We did a review and it's done, and no problem, no threat to Canada. This is in Canada's net benefit. I'm as eager to hear from industry specialists in the area and academics. And so my fear, Mr. Lemire, is that we will run out of time to get a complete and full picture of what's at risk here and what's at stake. And so if I could, would you be willing to modify your amendment to be a 4-meeting rather than a 6-meeting study? I think it's a compromise that would allow us to address all those 3 groups, the ministers and their officials, industry specialists, and then some academics who've done a lot of study in the area of Canada's national security.
Donc, il y a une proposition.
So there's a motion to move the amendment. Mr. Lemire, I would maintain my position of 2 meetings. First meeting with the minister and the officials, so we can ask questions at that point during this 2-hour meeting. I think we'll have time to do this. And indeed, I'd like to hear maybe from the industry in the second meeting. So I would maintain that we have 2 days of meetings.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to hear from my bloc colleague on his position regarding MP Fillmore's, a broader study on critical minerals. If you think that it'd be a worthwhile practice, because then we can talk about potential of including what we were talking about today in that broader study.
Mr. Dong and clerk, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have to dispose of the amendment that's been put on the floor first. So, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Voulez-vous que je réponde à la question qui m'a été interpellée, Monsieur le Président?
Do I answer the question that was put to me? Go ahead, Mr. Lemire, and then I will go to Mr. Mass. So to answer your question, Mr. Dung, I think that indeed this is something that we should be covering in the Tuesday meeting. I find that the motion tabled by Michael Kern is complete, and we could include various amendments made by Mr. Fillmore, but it's my opinion, I feel that this study the whole focus will be determined by the subcommittee. So we'll have to think about the relevance of looking at critical minerals on the whole, not just as it pertains to lithium, but a real study. And I think that's relevant.
Merci, Monsieur Lemire. Monsieur Mass.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Mass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hearing what I've heard now, I'm going to propose and see what my reaction to the colleagues are, is that it sounds like there's enough support here to get something off the ground. So whether it's 2 meetings or 4 meetings, I would suggest that we pass a motion without, being open to that. We'll start next week. We have a subcommittee meeting. We'll have 2 meetings on this for sure. And at the subcommittee meeting, we can decide how many more meetings there should be. That'll allow us to move on right now. It gets us off the ground. And then we could decide whether or not we want to add another 2 meetings from that during the subcommittee. I know that Mr. Dong mentioned my motion too. I'm always still interested at least to have 1 to 2 meetings with regards to the executives for the grocery store industry, or at least 1 meeting to have them come back and explain their issues or pandemic pay. I'd hope we could, get squeezed that in somehow. If not this next week, at least 1 meeting when we return to the House of Commons. But I'll park that aside, not to get more confusing. But maybe perhaps Mr. Fast, you can respond, or Mr. Lemire, if, for example, we have a motion here that comes together that we get 2 meetings for next week locked in, and then also 2, we have our subcommittee meeting where we can decide whether we want to carry on with a couple other meetings. I just will note this, if we have text of 2 meetings of witnesses, we will need at least 1 meeting for preparation for a report or some type of reporting process back to the House of Commons. So there's almost a guarantee that we have to have additional meeting, which would have been built in the 6 meetings, I believe. So we just need to keep that in mind because we will need that time. So I'll leave that, perhaps if my colleagues want to comment on that as maybe as a general compromise to get going on stuff, because I really want this committee. It has a history of doing a lot of really good stuff just to get to work, because it's such a big file. This file is huge for industry, and I'd hate for us to get ground out for 1 or 2 meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. And looking at colleagues on the screen, I think there's a broad agreement that members want to get this committee going. So I see Madame Lapointe.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes, good afternoon.
Support the motion that was put forward to this committee tonight. I can support the amendment that has been made by our Bloc colleague. Critical minerals is extremely important, especially when I come from the riding of Sudbury. And so to me, the non-support of my motion does not speak to my position that lithium is not important. It is. But I also believe that critical minerals should be looked at and discussed by this committee in its broader context. So it would also be important for us to look at and talk about the Investment Canada Act at this committee. So again, I could not support the original motion, but I would be in support of the amendment that has been made around 2 meetings.
Thank you, Madame Lapointe. So I see no other speakers on this amendment. And if it's, is it considered, is there a consensus on the amendment proposed by Mr. Lemire? Because if there is no consensus, then we'll have to go to a vote, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Clerk. So I'm looking for, in particular, Mr. Fast. Is there a consensus, or should we proceed to a vote on the amendment? And before we do, I would ask the clerk to perhaps read what it would look like. Mr. Fast.
For my part, I believe we, on the Conservative side, have consensus on the amendment that Mr. Lemire put forward. Given the fact that there is going to be a steering committee meeting, there could be a discussion of perhaps extending this to at least provide room for the report to be crafted once we've got all the information and testimony.
Okay, so then my understanding would be that we have the steering committee on Tuesday, and we aim for 2 meetings. Witnesses would have to be submitted for tomorrow, as explained in your motion, Mr. Fast. And I see Mr. Généreux. You're on mute. It wouldn't be 2022 if we didn't say you're on mute at least once a day.
Sorry about that. Je cherchais le bouton pour voter.
I was looking on the vote on the voting, but anyway, I was getting mixed up. But I imagine that. But I do understand, in the light of what Mr. Fast has just said, that there is in fact a consensus. So I don't see the point in having a vote. So we're now dealing with the motion. Are there any people who wish to speak about the motion itself? Do we have to reread it? I think we've all understood Mr. Lemire's motion.
Yes, Mr. Dung.
Could you have the amendment read out to us?
Mr. Clerk, if you could.
Okay, and I'm going to do my best here because there was a lot of conversation going on, and it seems that there was a consensus built around, and this is what I understood the amendment, was that we would replace the words at least 6 meetings with the words at least 2 meetings, and then further on in the motion that the study begin with 2 meetings as opposed to that the study begin with 3 meetings. So essentially just changing numbers. Minimum 2 and begin with 2.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So there's a consensus on the amendment, and then I assume then consensus on the motion itself as presented. So I think
one thing, just so I've got clarity, because I know Sebastian had asked, and I don't know he got an answer in relation to the role that the public safety minister plays in this process, or was that answered and I missed it? Because I had understood that he was seeking clarification with a view to maybe amending it so that we reduce the number of witnesses to the witnesses that have a crucial role that they actually play in this process. So if the national security agencies are providing advice, but that advice is ultimately actioned by the industry minister, it may well be that the public safety minister has no role to play here. But you know, I don't know, Mr. Fast, you can weigh in here with why he ought to be a witness. And I don't know, Sebastian, if you got an answer to your question. I didn't think you did.
Mr. Fast?
Yes, no, I don't believe that we had actually formally suggested that the public safety minister appear. We're interested in having the industry minister appear, and I think he knows that he's going to be asked to come, and I'd like to leave room for other witnesses. There are going to be officials with Minister Champagne in any event, but I want to leave as much room for industry and academic witnesses so that we have a full picture of what's at stake here.
Just the motion does read, though, that the committee invite the Minister of Innovation and the Minister of Public Safety to appear separately for 1 hour each. So, I mean, if we are to, it makes more sense to me that if we're especially reducing it to 2 meetings, that we would also amend to remove the Public Safety Minister. But
I agree with you. I agree with you. Remember that the motion incorporated the public safety minister when we had 6 meetings.
Fair.
But I think I've been clear. I think the industry minister is the one we want to have appear.
Okay, well then in that case, Joel, I think there is consensus in Mike or Clerk. I mean, I think there is consensus that we not only amend it down to 2 meetings, but that we also remove the public safety minister.
Yes, I'm looking around the virtual room and I see consensus. So and also I just want to, because the time frame is short and we're asking for meetings next week and we're going to have the subcommittee first on Tuesday, but it's also depending on the availability of witnesses, but we're certainly going to work with the clerk to try to fit those in next week, and otherwise it's going to be the first order of business as we resume Parliament if we don't have all the witnesses lined up. Madam Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment that if we're going to not have it mandatory that the public safety minister is there, that we do expect national security officials to be there for sure, because there is a number of officials that are listed in that motion. So we want to make sure that they were in attendance. I
think that's the consensus. So we have Mr. Clerk, I'm sorry if I'm not very formal, but it seems like the motion then doesn't need to go to a vote because I see everyone nodding in agreement for it to be passed.
Yeah, it would just be the rule is in the new virtual environment here in the hybrid environment is if there is obvious consent for the main motion as amended, then we would not need to go to a recorded division.
Perfect. Well, then that motion is adopted, and I don't think there's any other order of business, and so that would be the end of this committee. And
point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Mr. Massey.
Just a notation that you've continued a long line of compromise and consensus with regards to the committee, and actually ending a meeting early should be well noted.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's hope it continues that way. And I look forward to that subcommittee meeting next week so that we can have a robust agenda going forward. Mr. Massey, I hear your concerns. So thank you all for your collaboration, and this meeting is adjourned.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Bonne soirée.